Hey, welcome back, podcast friends. And in today's episode, this is going to be kind of a continuation of last episode. And I'm sorry, I totally forgot in the last episode to let you know the information that I'm got for last podcast, this podcast, and probably for the next couple is actually coming from a book that I just am in the middle of reading right now called Carnivore Cure by Judy Cho. And it's a really good book. It has a lot of information. And so that's why I'm just kind of breaking down this information to you. Again, it's not only from the book, there's all kinds of literature and studies and everything back this stuff up. I'm just saying that's where I got this. But if you're wanting to read a good book, Carnivore Cure by Judy Cho is one. And what we're going to be talking about is last week we talked about what makes a healthy digestive tract from the mouth to the anus, what things need to happen. And basically, there's three things that we do that can either have a healthy GI tract or an unhealthy GI tract. And one of those things is eating too much food is what can make an unhealthy GI tract. Also, decreasing the amount of acid that's in our stomach, either raising the pH of the stomach or decreasing the amount that's available is also horrible. And then eating very poor quality nutrient void food, like all the man-made products that you get in the grocery store and the box bottle pad cans, all that stuff that has labels on it with all the chemicals. That's what's killing our GI tract. And by killing our GI tract, we're killing ourselves as well. And that's what I'm going to be going through. So there's a lot of information in here that I'm going to go through. And just remember, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at pH, and we're also looking at the types of food that we eat and the amount of food that we eat. So the first thing, the whole system, our whole body, it works much less efficiently when we are feeding our body all this toxic man-made food with all these toxic seed oils and the high fructose corn syrup and sugar and ultra processed seeds. And it's horrible. But you'll know when you have a very poor digestive tract because you're going to feel it. You're going to feel it. You're going to be tired all the time. You could definitely have signs of depression, which we'll talk about that because of the bacteria that we have in our gut. You can be sick all the time, mental fogginess, just things like that. If you have those symptoms, chances are your gut is unhealthy. And even if you want to eat plants and things like that that have toxins in them, which I've talked about that earlier, it's fine to eat those, but if you eat those when your GI tract is all messed up, it's going to make it a lot worse. All these toxins that are in plants, and I talked about this in episode 117 called What Toxins Are in Plants. But all those toxins, if you have a good, healthy GI tract, you can keep a lot of these toxins from ever getting absorbed into your body. But when it's all disturbed, these toxins from plants can get there also, and it just magnifies the problems that you have. So the first thing you need to do, if you notice that there's things that you can't eat, like gluten or lactose or certain vegetables, the first thing you need to do is heal your gut. And once you do, you're going to find that you're going to be able to eat some of these foods that you weren't able to before because you have a nice, healthy gut. So let's start this off. Remember your gut, we're talking about from the mouth to the anus. So we'll just break it down each part. So the first part, and again, if you haven't listened to the last episode, you might want to do that because I'm going to skim through some of this stuff. But the last episode talks about what a healthy gut, exactly how a healthy gut works. This is talking about what happens when it goes awry. And so the first thing, in the mouth, when you do things in the mouth, you have to have saliva because saliva, it moistens the food, so it helps it pass down into the stomach, but it also starts the first part of digestion by producing amylase. It has amylase in it, which is an enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates into glucose. So it breaks down all the man-made food and all the plants, vegetables, and fruits, all the plant-based foods, which are carbohydrates. Those get broken down, start getting broken down to glucose in the mouth. And that's a good thing. That's what you want. So when you swallow it, this food is already pretty much digested. But what happens when you don't have enough saliva? That's a problem and what causes not enough saliva? Well, the big thing is eating too much. You're just eating constantly and you can't produce enough saliva in your mouth. And this is very important. When you eat all this food and you don't have enough, if you're multitasking, if you're talking or working or something, you tend to eat a lot more. You swallow food before you're able to chew it. Because remember, you should be chewing your food about 20 to 30 times. I know that sounds like a lot. It does to me too. But depending on the type of food you want, like if you're eating a good ribeye steak, you will easily chew on that for 20 to 30 times every time. The more you chew it, the more you break it down into very, very tiny pieces. And the more you get that amylase and you get the other stuff in there that moistens it up and allows it to pass through. When you're eating all the time and when you're eating and talking or multitasking, you don't chew it very much at all. And then all of a sudden you swallow it. So now your stomach's left with having to do all this digestion. So that's stuff. The other thing is if you don't have enough of the amylase from the saliva, if you don't have enough in there to start breaking down your carbohydrates, you're going to get some carbohydrates that get down into the small intestine that haven't been digested yet. And when you don't have enough the amylase in the salivary glands, that means you also aren't going to be getting very much of the amylase from the pancreas, because the pancreas also produces that. And again, I talked about that in the last episode. But so if you don't get enough salivary amylase, you're not going to get very much pancreatic amylase. And so that's a very good possibility that you're going to have a lot of carbohydrates passing all the way down through your GI tract that should never have been there, should have already been absorbed and absorbed into the body. So, and this causes a lot of trouble having this undigested food go through the GI tract. And we'll talk about that in a little bit also. But you don't want undigested food going down through your intestine and into your colon. So like we said, the things that you can do, don't sit at your desk when you're eating. Don't multitask while you're eating. Don't drive while you're eating. Don't stand while you're eating. You need to sit down. You need to relax. You need to chew your food and realize that this is extremely important to get it down to small pieces, a lot of fluid, a lot of amylase, and that allows it to go on into the stomach. So, and over time, if you don't do this, a lot of these undigested carbohydrates in the stomach, they actually start growing bad bacteria. And we've talked about your gut microbiome, how important it is that the bacteria that's in our guts do so many healthy things for our bodies, as far as getting nutrients in our body, breaking down our food, allowing us to have, our fat soluble vitamin A, D, and K, and breaking down fat. And there's just so many things that good bacteria do. However, if you have bad bacteria, the type of bacteria that lives off sugars, lives off carbohydrates, like Candida albicans and Klebsiella, these types of bugs that are in your intestines actually start wreaking all kinds of habits in your intestine and start tearing your intestines up. So you do not want undigested carbohydrates going down through your stomach. That's the last thing. So either don't put them in your mouth at all, or if you do, make sure you chew them and get enough of this amylase going both from the salivary glands and also from your pancreas. So now you have all this food. You have this food in your stomach. And let's just say, and remember the stomach, if you remember from last week, your stomach needs to be at a pH of 1.5 to 3. That is so important because that does so many things. One, it digests your food. It sits here and breaks up your food. The other thing that it does is having that pH, that low, that more acidic pH, that also changes pepsinogen that's in the stomach. It changes from pepsinogen into pepsin. And pepsin is an enzyme that breaks down the protein. So if your pH is too high, you're not making any pepsin, so you can't break down protein. So now you have even more food that's in your stomach that's not being able to be digested. And the problem, a lot of people, they get this reflux. They get acid that refluxes up into their esophagus, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But the problem with acid reflux isn't because you have too much acid. It's usually because you don't have enough, and you're causing pressure. You're causing problems with that lower esophageal sphincter between the bottom of the feeding tube, your esophagus, and the top of your stomach. So there's that little valve there called the lower esophageal sphincter. And you want to keep that in as tact as possible. And what makes that get bad is, like we said, wrong food, too much food, and not having enough not having enough acid in your stomach. And so you eat this food, it gets in your stomach. You need a pH of 1.5 to 3. However, and again, this also, having a pH that kills all the bacteria and all the bugs that are in the food that you eat, because there's always bacteria everywhere. That kills that. So if you raise the pH one way or another, if the pH of your stomach is elevated, then you aren't killing all these bacteria that are coming in with the food also. So that's why this is very important, that you don't want to raise the pH of the stomach. So things that people do, like drinking a lot of water with their meal, you really shouldn't drink a lot of water because water has a pH of 7. So when you drink a lot of water with your meal, you're diluting out that acid and you're raising that pH and you're raising it back up to higher than 3, which you don't want a pH higher than 3 because that starts breaking all the functions down. And they're even starting to produce all these alkaline waters that are out there telling everybody, oh, you need to drink these alkaline waters. That is not true. You do not. You want to keep the pH of the stomach between 1.5 and 3. That is very, very, very important. And you'll know if your pH of your stomach isn't good, or if you're not digesting all your food, because you're going to have like belching after a meal. You might feel bloated. You might feel sleepy or constipated, or you could even have loose stools or gas. Anything in the GI tract, those are all symptoms of an extremely dysfunctional stomach and intestines. Okay. And this becomes dysfunctional when you raise the pH. And we'll talk about different things that people do to raise the pH. But when you raise the pH, what it does is it weakens that lower esophageal sphincter. It's called LES tone, lower esophageal sphincter tone. When you decrease that tone, what's supposed to happen is when you eat and you have food sitting in your stomach and it's being digested, you want the valve at the top of the stomach, which is your lower esophageal sphincter, and the valve at the bottom of the stomach, the pyloric sphincter. You want both of those to be closed so your food can just sit there and digest and digest and digest. And you have to do that because the valve at the bottom of the stomach, the pyloric sphincter, it's very tiny. It's only about 3 millimeters in diameter. So again, I said a credit card is about 1 millimeter thick. The tip of a brand new crayon is about 2 millimeters thick. So the 3 millimeters of your pyloric sphincter is very small. So your food really needs to be digested really, really well before it can fit through the pyloric sphincter. And again, things that you do to increase the pH, or eating too much or eating the wrong food, can decrease that pyloric sphincter too. And it needs to be that way because the valve on the top, when you eat, your stomach will contract. And it needs to keep that top valve closed. So as it contracts, it pushes food through that lower valve, that pyloric sphincter. If you've got a bad lower esophageal sphincter and your stomach contracts, that food and that acid is going to reflux back up in your esophagus. And that's when you get heartburn. That's when you get indigestion. That's when you get all the bad things because you've lowered the tone of your lower esophageal sphincter. So different things that can do this. One, we already said overeating. When you eat too much, or when you eat too much of harmful food, your body spends so much time trying to detoxify the toxins that are in all the chemicals that are in man-made food. It's horrible. It's horrible what they're putting in the food and telling everybody that's food. That is not food. That is fake food. And it's not even fake food. There's no nutrients and it's killing us. And this is one of the ways that it does it. And that type of food also makes you tend to overeat. But so you need to have the food in your stomach and you need to break that down. Otherwise, you're causing your body to overwork to try to detoxify these foods and to try to get them all broken down so you can do it. So when you do this, when you take different things like antacids or things, say you have reflux because you've eaten the types of food that's decreasing your lower esophageal sphincter tone. And so now you have all this acid reflux. When you eat certain foods, it comes up and it causes heartburn. So there's different things that we do that we should not be doing to take care of this heartburn. But like I said, one was overeating. So we shouldn't be eating too much. We should be sitting down, relaxing, and have a good meal where we can chew our food. The other thing that happens is there are different foods that we eat that also cause either increased acid production or decrease in the lower esophageal sphincter tone, and also the pylorus. And things like this, foods that we eat that we really shouldn't be eating, are things like chocolate, citrus fruits, juice, peppermint, tomatoes, garlic, onions, spicy and fried foods. And it's so crazy what I know. I see people do this. They know that spicy foods tear them up, or some of these other foods tear them up. So instead of avoiding those foods and healing their gut and then trying them again later, what they do is they just automatically start popping Rolaids or popping Tums or Mylanta or something like that. They're like, oh, this is going to turn me up. I'll go ahead and eat it, and I'll just take an antacid. This is what happens when you do that. When you take antacids, what you're doing is you are increasing the pH of the stomach, and you're increasing it higher than the 3. So none of these things start working. Your whole stomach starts breaking down, where now you can't turn pepsin into pepsinogen, so you can't digest your proteins. You've already been eating too fast, so you don't even have enough amylase, so you're not digesting that. So food is just sitting in your stomach and it's rotting. Other foods that can also aggravate a lot of this is things like, let's just talk about why. Chocolate. The reason chocolate is bad is because there's a thing in chocolate called methylxanthine. And methylxanthine is in the cocoa, that's in the cocoa leaves of the cocoa tree. And this actually relaxes your lower esophageal sphincter, which means when that's relaxed, acid can go from your stomach up into the esophagus when it contracts. The reason peppermint, garlic, and onions are bad because they also relax that lower esophageal sphincter. Greasy, spicy, or fried food, those also relax the lower esophageal sphincter, and they actually they also affect the pylorus, so they delay your stomach emptying. So now this food is staying in their stomach longer, but it's still not being digested because you don't have enough acid to take care of it. And that's also what you see with a lot of things like tomatoes and tomato-based products. They're highly acidic, and those also cause reflux up into your esophagus. And remember, the stomach, it's got mucus that has things in it on the lining to keep it protected from all this extremely acidic hydrochloric acid and this stomach acid. It's made that way. Your esophagus is not, and neither is the first part of your small intestine, your duodenum. That's not made for that. So when you have problems with that lower esophageal sphincter at the top of your stomach and the pyloric sphincter at the bottom of your stomach, when you have trouble with those, you're starting to allow acid to get into places they shouldn't be. And that's when you get duodenal ulcers and gastric ulcers and esophageal ulcers. That's where this comes from. And there's also things like beverages that you drink, soda pop, alcohol, especially like red wines, coffee, caffeinated or decaffeinated, and then other caffeinated drinks. And all these, what these carbonated beverages do is they cause bloating. You start producing a lot of gas in the stomach, causes bloating. That causes increased pressure, and this can go up through the lower esophageal sphincter also if you have a weakened lower esophageal sphincter from the foods that you eat. So then the other thing that decreases that is stress. Stress is so horrible for the body in so many ways. So with any good nutrition program, you've got to learn how to deal with stress, whatever that is. If you can go for a long walk in nature or read a book or just hang out on your back deck, whatever you need to do to relax is going to be so important, because stress is horrible on the body. And stress also weakens that lower esophageal sphincter. And then there's medications you can take, like beta agonists or nitrates or calcium channel blockers or progesterone or nicotine or any of these things. Those also, they affect your lower esophageal sphincter. So when you're doing any of that stuff and you're having heartburn or anything, realize that could be the reason, is because you're getting your stomach acid up into the esophagus where it's not supposed to be. So now let's just talk about medication that people actually take when they start having indigestion. And this is horrible. Doing a quick fix is never, ever, ever the right way. And it's not a fix. I don't even like the term quick fix, because all it is you're just postponing the inevitable. Same thing that medications are doing with blood pressure and with heart attacks and with diabetes and all these other things. All they're doing is treating the symptoms. They aren't treating the underlying problem, and that is your nutrition. So when you take something like Mylanta, Rolaids, Tums, anything like this, that raised the pH of the stomach from, remember, we want it 1.5 to 3. It's going to raise that pH up to around 3.5. That's not enough acid to be doing all the things that you need acid to do. And when you do this for a long time, you increase that blood pH for a long time, you can actually end up with a disease, especially if you're taking things like Tums, calcium carbonate. Anytime you have calcium carbonate, the calcium that you eat in those, like Tums, Rolaids, that can actually produce a rebound acidity. So the more you take, the more acid you're producing. So the more you have to take. It's kind of like you do with Afrin for the nasal spray. You're only supposed to take that no more than 3 days because you get a rebound congestion. It's the same thing when you take Rolaids or Tums. If you're taking these things all the time, you're actually causing your stuff to produce more acid. So it's making it worse. And again, you're raising the pH of the stomach to 3.5. So you're not able to get the pepsin from pepsinogen. So you can't break down the proteins. You can't kill the bacteria. You can't break all your food down into a size that'll go through the pylorus. So you're doing a lot of things. When you go even further and you take what's called an H2 receptor blocker, okay, and these are things like Zantac, Pepsid, Tagamet, and it's called H2, that's histamine 2, because histamine is what's used in protecting the stomach and the stomach acid. If you block that, now you're going to raise that pH of the stomach up to about 4. So now it's even worse. But then what gets worse is people bypass that and they go straight to what's called your proton pump inhibitors. And that's what proton pump is. That is the pump that's in the stomach that actually is producing the acid. And these proton pump inhibitors do that. We're talking about Prilosec, Prevacid, Protonix, Nexium. Those actually shut off the pump that's in your stomach that's producing the acid. This is the worst thing you could do because now you have no acid and the food is rotting. It's causing bacteria to grow in your stomach and your intestines that should never have been there. These medications were only supposed to be used for acute times of you have some kind of ulcer in your stomach. For whatever reason, your stomach's broken down because you've been eating this kind of food. Your stomach's breaking down. You're starting to get little ulcers because that acid is eating holes in the stomach and in the esophagus and the duodenum, the first part of the intestine. So you have to take something like Prevacid, a proton pump inhibitor, to stop that just for a little bit so your body can heal. But you were never, ever, ever supposed to be on these long term. You're not supposed to be on these for months at a time and years at a time. That was never supposed to happen. And people who do that are having severe issues, and they have no idea that's caused from all the trouble they're having with their GI tract. So proton pump inhibitors, they raise the pH to about 5. These are really horrible. They actually shut off your stomach's ability to produce acid by about 90 to 95% for 24 hours. Then what happens after 24 hours? You take another one. You take another Protonix or Pepsid or Prevacid or whatever. So that's what you don't want to do, because the less acid you make, the worse it's going to be able to break down the food. Again, you can't get your proteins broken down. You can't get your carbohydrates broken down. But what's even more is this food sits in there and it starts rotting because you're not able to absorb the food. Same thing people are seeing that are taking this horrible drug Ozempic that's causing all kinds of horrible things to happen to people, because all it does is cause them to be extremely malnourished. So yes, they lose weight. They're losing fat because they're not eating anything to give them energy. And that's what you want to do. But they're also losing most of the weight they lose is muscle, because they're also not eating protein. So the body's getting it from the muscles. And they're also not getting the vitamins and minerals because they basically just stop eating. So Ozempic, when you're on Ozempic, all you're doing is you're malnourishing yourself. That's all that is. And there's a lot of adverse effects happening because of that. But so that is not the way you do it. You don't want to paralyze the stomach because you eat too much. You want to eat the kind of food that keeps you satisfied. But anyway, that's in all my other podcasts. I'll get off that subject. But the main thing you want to do is keep everything very acidic so you can kill the bacteria, the yeast, the viruses, the parasites, all the stuff that gets into your GI tract. And you want to be able to metabolize your food well. The other thing that happens with the pH, if you raise the pH of the stomach, you have to have that pH, that acid of 1.5 to 3. You need that acid to go out of the stomach and through the pylorus and hit the duodenum, because that acid, that amount of acid, what it does is that stimulates your body to do a lot of things. It stimulates the production of what's called secretin. And I talked about this in the last episode, but secretin is a hormone that causes your gallbladder or causes your pancreas to release its pancreatic enzymes, which is you have lipase that breaks down lipids, protease that breaks down proteins, and then amylase that breaks down carbohydrates. Those come from the pancreas into the common bile duct. Then you also have the gallbladder squeezing going into the common bile duct. And then you have the liver producing sodium bicarbonate going into the common bile duct also. And all of that goes and lands in the first part of the duodenum. If that pH is above 1.5 to 3, then you're not getting secretin. So you're not getting enough these enzymes from the pancreas or the bicarb from the liver. So now you have a higher acidity of fluid going through the intestines. And the fluid in the intestines should be a pH of around 7 to 8.5. Remember, 0 is very acidic, 14 is very basic. Both those are very strong. And neutral is 7. That's like water. You really want your intestines to have a pH of around 7 to 8.5. You don't want it lower than that because that starts messing up a lot of things. So again, that's what happens if you have all this acid in the stomach. You weren't able to take care of it. And so it drips into the stomach or into the intestines. And again, this causes a lot of problems. So the pyloric sphincter is one of the things that stays closed during this. And when you increase the acid and you decrease that, you put a lot of stress on that pyloric sphincter because bigger pieces of food are trying to go through there because you didn't digest it in the stomach as well. So when it contracts, you have larger pieces of food going through because it's not digested and starts tearing up that pyloric sphincter. So that's what you don't want. And there's thing actually called pyloric stenosis that we see in kids. If you ever have an infant and they have projectile vomiting, they'll drink and drink and drink, and then all of a sudden they'll project vomit all the way across the room. Sometimes that's called pyloric stenosis, and that's because the valve at the bottom of their stomach, it gets swollen and no food can go through. And so the stomach just holds it and holds it until all of a sudden it can't hold anymore, and then it contracts, and that's where you get projectile vomiting. So a lot of things, now you tend to grow out of that, as you get older, and the pyloric sphincter will, depending on what's causing it. But again, I'm just letting you know how important that pyloric sphincter is, the valve at the bottom of the stomach going in the duodenum. And now, again, we talked about what happens with decreased secretin and decreased sodium bicarbonate. And so you're not getting the enzymes produced. So you have more bacteria in your bowel because you were never able to kill the bacteria and the viruses and the yeast and parasites. You don't have enough acid, didn't have enough acid. So now you have all that in there. Then you have this food that's actually sitting in there and rotting because it didn't have a chance to get broken down as well as it should have been. The other thing, when you eat bad food, like man-made food, then they're telling you to eat all this no-fat, low-fat diets, which is absolutely horrible, and that's what's killing us. What happens is, and we've talked about this, there's an enzyme called cholecystokinin that's all the way through your intestinal tract. Cholecystokinin, besides keeping you feeling full, so when you don't eat fat, then you don't get that feeling of fullness. The other thing cholecystokinin does is it tells your gallbladder to squeeze and contract the bile fluid that's being stored in it to go out and get into the intestines so it can start breaking down these fats. That's what the bile in the gallbladder is for. So if you're producing all this bile, but you're not eating fat, or you're eating this toxic seed oils, which is not a fat, it's toxic. When you eat that stuff, you are not having cholecystokinin stimulate the gallbladder to release. So the fluid, all this fluid, this bile stays in the gallbladder, and it becomes very, very thick, very viscous. And now when you do eat fat, it can't contract. And that's when you have pain. You eat, and a little bit later, all of a sudden you have this severe pain because your gallbladder is trying to expel this stuff, but you haven't used it in so long, it just cakes up and it doesn't work. And so that's when you go and you get gallstones, and you have to go in, you have to have your gallbladder removed. So it's very, very important to have good, healthy fat in your GI tract, mainly, and that's going to keep your gallbladder functioning well, keep your pancreas functioning well, keep your liver functioning well, keep the food digested well, keep the bad bacteria and yeast and parasites and everything out of your GI tract. So it's very, very important. And the other thing, like I said, if you're having trouble with a lot of foods like vegetables, because there are a lot of toxins in vegetables, and also when you have these seed oils that man-made food puts in almost everything, those are horrible for you. And I won't go into that because that was in episode 21. I talked about, are vegetables and seed oils bad for you? Yes, they are horrible for you. But when you eat that kind of food, your gallbladder doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And so now you have all this food sitting in your stomach with all this bacteria. It's tearing up. It's making holes in your intestines. So things that used to be able to stay in the intestines don't stay in there anymore. They get absorbed into your blood. And that's why we're seeing a lot of allergies now that we never used to see. A lot of food intolerabilities that we're starting to see, like with the gluten and with lactose. And it's also why we're seeing a lot of autoimmune diseases. The bacteria in your gut, when you have this bad bacteria and this leaky gut, a lot of that refers into autoimmune diseases. So we've been told forever that you can't cure an autoimmune disease, and you can't cure diabetes, and you can't cure blood pressure, and can't cure all these things. And it's all a lie. It's not a lie. There are some people who know, but your physicians and everybody, they don't realize that because they've been taught that. But when you heal your gut, you'd be amazed at all the things that actually start healing in your whole body and in your whole life. So now you have all this food. It's going down through your intestines. And the next thing it has to do is it's going from the small intestine going into the large intestine. And remember, I talked about all this last week on how the GI tract is set up. So I won't be going through that. But there's another sphincter, which is a sphincter is a ring-shaped muscle, like the pupil in your eye. It's a ring-shaped muscle. And these muscles are supposed to stay closed. So it's a very good divider. So you have a sphincter at the bottom of the small intestine, right before it goes in the large intestine, called the ileocecal valve. It's called ileocecal because the ileum is the last part of the small intestine, and the cecum is a little pouch at the very first part of your colon or your large intestine. So that's why it's called the ileocecal valve. But this valve is extremely important. It has to stay shut because it wants all the food, all the processed food, all the toxins that your intestine been accumulating as it goes through the GI tract, gets dumped into the colon. It doesn't want those toxins going back up. There's also a lot of bacteria in the colon that you don't want that going up into your intestines either. And there's a lot of functions of the colon. So you want to keep that very, very intact. In fact, that's a big thing. If you do have some of these issues because of the type of food that you have been eating, where you have ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease or irritable bowel syndrome or any of these things that are caused by the food that you eat, and that's what these are caused by, if you have any of those, and they have to remove part of your small intestine and part of your colon, it's a very important thing, and all the surgeons know this, that you keep that ileocecal valve intact as much as you possibly can. You don't want to remove the ileocecal valve. Move some before and some after. But once that's removed, now everything that's in your colon that would be in your stool, now that gets to go back up into your intestines and wreak havoc up there. So you don't want undigested food in the stomach. And when you decrease the nutrients in the gut, this is when you get things like inflammation, diverticulitis, irritable bowel syndrome, all the other things we talked about. That's what this is caused for. So we need good, healthy food that gets broken down in the nutrients you need at the time that you need it, and you have the good hormones and enzymes being released because you're keeping the pHs the same. This is what you want to do for a healthy gut. So do not go and be grabbing for all these antacids and these H2 blockers and these proton pump inhibitors. Yes, that may help the acid immediately, but once that's over, realize it's the food that you're eating that's causing this. If you're eating man-made food, 100%, that's causing it because of all the inflammation and all the carbohydrates and everything that's made out of. It's horrible for your stomach and your intestines and your colon. So don't grab for food. Don't look for the quick fix with medications because you do not want to raise the pH of your stomach because that's going to screw up everything else for the rest of the GI tract. You want to be able to kill the bugs. You want to be able to break down your protein. You want to keep your pylorus to be able to stay closed so it keeps all the food in the stomach until it's time and broken down small enough to go through a normal, healthy pyloric sphincter. Acid reflux. The reason it's not because of too much acid, is because you've got so much food in there that's pushing on that lower esophageal sphincter and it's causing problems. Or you're eating the kind of food that causes decreased lower esophageal sphincter tone. So anything like that, if you're having reflux, you've got to look at the type of food that you're eating and you've got to change and start eating healthy food. Real animal products by far is the number one. If you have a healthy gut, then you can eat some fruits and vegetables also, but definitely stay away from man-made food. And that'll decrease your acid reflux. And again, the longer food sits around, the more it ferments and the more it starts turning, the bacteria and everything starts to rot in your stomach. And that's what people that are taking Ozempic and all these GLP-1 agonists, that's what they're seeing. They're seeing food that usually should have stayed in their food for no more than 2 hours, that at the most. Now they're seeing food stay in people's stomachs for up to 3 days, and the food is rotting in their stomach. So it's called Ozempic burps. It's you're belching up all this rotten, putrefied food that's sitting in your stomach because you gave yourself a drug that makes it where your stomach doesn't work. It's absolutely horrible what's actually going on. It's criminal. I truly think this is criminal what's going on. So you don't want to break down your stomach lining. You want to keep that intact. You don't want ulcers. And you want that pH of 1 to 3.5. You need that. So it also stimulates the release of secretin, which helps get the enzymes and the sodium bicarbonate and everything out of the liver, now the pancreas, into the small intestine where it can work, where it does the things that it needs to do. And we talked about some of that in the last episode. So I know there's a lot of information here, but I want you to realize, if you're having any of these issues, if you're having the bloating, the ulcers, inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, all those, if you're having those, it's because your gut isn't healthy. The reason your gut isn't healthy is you're eating very poor quality fake food from man-made food, chips, crackers, cookies, everything that you get on the inner aisles of grocery stores. It's horrible. Anything with a label on it, basically, that's just all the chemicals that they put in the food that are causing toxicities in your body. If you have any of these issues, try to go back to just a plain animal-based food. Once you heal your gut, then you can start introducing some of these plants back. And I mean just fruits and vegetables. You can start introducing those back. But if you have serious issues, I would really, really look into doing that. Is just, you've got to clean up your health, and that's the way you do it. So I won't go in any more of that, but I just want to make sure you realize that it's very important. Chew your food. Get a lot of amylase in there. Get a lot of fluid in there, saliva in there. Make it moist. Swallow your food. Don't be multitasking. Don't eat too much. You don't want a lot of food on your stomach, because that puts pressure on both your upper and your lower esophageal sphincter, and also your pyloric sphincter. So you don't want a lot of food. You don't want this toxic stuff that man makes, because all those chemicals are also hard. And stay away from the foods that actually cause a weakening of those of the lower esophageal sphincter. Chew your food, relax, enjoy it, give yourself time, and eat proper food. And you'll see how much better you feel once your gut is healed. You're going to feel so much better. And then you can start introducing some of these other foods back if you want to. So that's all I've got for now. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, have a wonderful week, and always make simple, healthy choices to live a quality life.